The question posed in today's title contains a fundamental historical error. But it's an error that reveals something important about the myths, rumors, and conspiracy theories that have surrounded Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun for decades. The simple historical fact is that Eva Braun had no children, either before, during, or after World War II. She died by suicide alongside Hitler in the Führerbunker in Berlin on April 30th, 1945, having married him only hours earlier in a brief civil ceremony. She was childless at the time of her death at age 33. However, the persistence of rumors and claims about Hitler and Eva Braun having children, and the broader questions about Hitler's personal life, his relationship with Eva Braun, and the conspiracy theories that emerged after their deaths, tell us something fascinating about how history, mythology, and misinformation intersect. Today, we'll explore why Eva Braun never had children, examine the various rumors and conspiracy theories that have claimed otherwise, investigate similar false claims about Hitler having offspring, and understand why these myths have proven so durable despite having no basis in historical fact. We'll also look at Eva Braun's family, her sisters and their children who actually did survive the war, and how they dealt with their connection to Hitler's companion. This is a story about truth and fiction, about how history gets distorted, and about why it matters to separate fact from fantasy when examining even the most notorious figures of the 20th century. Eva Braun was born in Munich, Germany in 1912, the second of 3 daughters in a middle-class Catholic family. Her father was a schoolteacher, and the family lived a respectable if modest existence. Eva showed little academic ambition, but was attractive, athletic, and enjoyed dancing and gymnastics. After finishing school, she worked in the photography shop owned by Heinrich Hoffmann, Hitler's official photographer. It was through this connection that Eva met Hitler in 1929, when she was just 17 years old and Hitler was 40. At the time, Hitler was increasingly prominent in German politics, but not yet in power. He was still involved with another woman, and Eva's relationship with him developed gradually over the next few years. After the suicide of Hitler's previous companion in 1931, Eva became more central to his life, though their relationship was kept largely secret from the German public for political and image reasons. Eva Braun's role in Hitler's life was that of companion and mistress rather than public partner. Hitler believed that his image as Germany's leader required him to appear married to the nation rather than to any individual woman. He cultivated a persona of self-sacrifice and dedication to Germany that he felt would be compromised by having an obvious domestic life. Therefore, Eva was kept largely hidden, living in Munich and later at Hitler's mountain retreat at Berchtesgaden, but not appearing in public with him or being acknowledged officially. She attended some social functions at Hitler's residences, but was introduced as a secretary or assistant rather than as his partner. This secrecy extended to the question of their physical relationship and the possibility of children. The relationship clearly had an intimate dimension. They lived together in his private residences, shared quarters, and those who observed them noted affectionate behavior. But the exact nature of their physical relationship has been a subject of speculation. The question of whether Eva Braun could have had children requires us to examine both the historical evidence and the biological realities. First, there is no credible evidence that Eva Braun was ever pregnant during her relationship with Hitler. She was observed by numerous people over many years, including servants, staff, Hitler's associates, and her own family members. In an era before modern pregnancy tests, a pregnancy would have been observable, particularly in later stages, and would have been noticed by those around her. No contemporary accounts from people who actually knew Eva Braun mention pregnancy, childbirth, or children. This silence is significant because it comes from a wide range of sources, including people who had no reason to conceal such information, and in the case of post-war testimony, had every reason to reveal interesting details about Hitler's private life. Second, Eva Braun's lifestyle would have made concealing a pregnancy extremely difficult. She was frequently photographed by Heinrich Hoffmann, both in casual settings and more formal portraits. These photographs, many of which survive, show her throughout the years of her relationship with Hitler, and none show evidence of pregnancy. She was athletic and enjoyed swimming, sunbathing, and outdoor activities, wearing clothing that would have revealed obvious pregnancy. She also maintained correspondence with friends and family, and while these letters discuss her life, her frustrations with Hitler's absences and secrecy, and various personal matters, they contain no references to pregnancy or children. Third, and perhaps most significantly, Hitler himself had strong feelings about children and paternity that make it highly unlikely he would have chosen to father children with Eva Braun or anyone else. Hitler expressed the view that his devotion to Germany precluded normal domestic life. He spoke of being married to Germany and suggested that having children would divide his attention and create vulnerabilities. He was also deeply concerned with his own mortality and legacy, and there's no indication he wanted biological descendants. Additionally, there are questions about Hitler's physical health and capability of fathering children, as some historians have suggested he may have had medical conditions affecting fertility, though this remains speculative and unconfirmed. Despite the lack of any credible evidence, rumors about Hitler and Eva Braun having children began circulating during the war and have persisted ever since. Some of these rumors were propaganda, deliberate disinformation spread for political purposes. Others were conspiracy theories that emerged from the general mystery surrounding Hitler's private life and the secrecy that characterized the Nazi leadership. Still others were cases of mistaken identity or wishful thinking by individuals who wanted to believe they had some connection to historical figures, no matter how infamous. Let's examine some of the specific claims and why they don't hold up to scrutiny. One persistent rumor involves a French child allegedly born from a relationship between Hitler and a French woman during World War I. This story, which has appeared in various forms, claims that Hitler fathered a child during his service as a soldier in France or Belgium, and that this child grew up without knowing their father's identity. The story is almost certainly false. Hitler's movements during World War I are well documented. He served on the Western Front, but there's no evidence of any extended relationship with a French woman. The story appears to have originated from post-war gossip and has been embellished over time. DNA testing has been performed on some individuals claiming to be Hitler's descendants through this alleged World War I relationship, and results have consistently failed to support the claims. Another category of rumors involves children that Eva Braun supposedly gave birth to in secret, who were then adopted or hidden to protect them from association with Hitler. These stories typically claim that Eva became pregnant at some point in the 1930s or early 1940s, that the pregnancy was concealed, that she gave birth in secret, and that the child was given to another family to raise. The variations on this story are numerous, with different claimed locations for the birth, different alleged adoptive families, and different supposed fates for these phantom children. However, none of these stories can withstand serious historical scrutiny. The logistical challenges of concealing a pregnancy and arranging a secret adoption would have been enormous, requiring the complicity of numerous people, and yet no credible witness has ever come forward to confirm any such arrangement. Moreover, the timeline of Eva Braun's activities and whereabouts is well documented from photographs, film footage, and witness accounts, and there are no unaccounted gaps of the many months that would have been required for a pregnancy and recovery from childbirth. A particularly persistent conspiracy theory emerged after the war, claiming that Hitler and Eva Braun didn't actually die in the bunker in 1945, but instead escaped to South America, where they lived under assumed names and had children. This theory, which has been thoroughly debunked by historians but continues to appear in sensationalist books and television programs, suggests that the reported suicides were faked, that doubles were used to deceive the Soviets who found the bodies, and that Hitler and Eva Braun fled to Argentina or another South American country where Nazi sympathizers helped them establish new identities. According to these theories, they then lived out their lives in hiding and had children who are alive today. This entire narrative is fiction. The evidence for Hitler and Eva Braun's deaths in the bunker is overwhelming, including testimony from multiple witnesses who were present, physical evidence of the bodies, dental records, and numerous other corroborating factors. The escape theories require us to believe in elaborate conspiracies involving numerous participants who somehow all maintained perfect secrecy, which is both implausible and unsupported by evidence. The DNA question has become particularly relevant in recent decades, as genetic testing has become more accessible and more people have claimed to be descendants of Hitler or Eva Braun. Several individuals over the years have undergone DNA testing to determine if they are related to Hitler. In most cases, these tests have conclusively demonstrated no genetic relationship. In a few cases, tests have shown distant relation to Hitler's known family members, meaning these individuals are distant cousins of Hitler, descendants of common ancestors from several generations back, not direct descendants of Hitler himself. This is unsurprising given that Hitler's extended family tree includes many branches and numerous descendants of his grandparents and great-grandparents. Being a distant cousin of Hitler is very different from being his child, and no one has ever been confirmed through DNA testing to be a direct descendant of either Hitler or Eva Braun. It's worth noting that Hitler's attitudes towards sex, relationships, and his own physical body were unusual and have been the subject of considerable historical and psychological analysis. Multiple historians and biographers have suggested that Hitler may have been sexually dysfunctional or had unconventional sexual preferences. Some accounts from people who knew him suggest he had limited interest in conventional sexual relationships. Eva Braun herself reportedly complained to friends about Hitler's lack of attention and affection, and there are suggestions in historical sources that their physical relationship may have been limited or unconventional. While we should be cautious about making definitive claims about Hitler's private life based on incomplete evidence, it's relevant to note that the historical record suggests a relationship that was emotionally intense for Eva, but possibly not conventionally intimate in ways that would have led to pregnancy. Now let's turn to what we can say with certainty about Eva Braun's family and what happened to them after the war. Eva had two sisters, Ilse and Gretel, both of whom survived World War II and lived for many decades afterward. These sisters and their children represent the actual post-war legacy of the Braun family, as opposed to the imaginary children of Eva herself. Ilse Braun, the oldest sister, worked as a receptionist and later married a doctor. She had no children and lived quietly in Germany after the war, largely avoiding publicity about her connection to Eva and Hitler. She died in 1979. Gretel Braun, the youngest sister, married SS officer Hermann Fegelein in 1944 in a wedding ceremony that Hitler and Eva attended. Fegelein was executed by the SS in the final days of the war for attempting to desert and for other offenses. Gretel was pregnant at the time and gave birth to a daughter in May 1945, just days after Eva's death. This daughter, Eva Barbara Fegelein, named after her aunt, Eva Braun, represents the closest thing to a child connected to Eva Braun, though she was, of course, Eva's niece, not daughter. Eva Barbara Fegelein, born in the immediate aftermath of the war, grew up with the burden of being named after Hitler's mistress and being the daughter of an executed SS officer. Her mother, Gretel, eventually remarried and tried to provide a normal life for her daughter. Eva Barbara kept a very low profile throughout her life, changed her name, and avoided any public discussion of her family connection. She married, had children of her own, and worked in ordinary professions, living a deliberately unremarkable life to escape the shadow of her aunt and her biological father. She has given very few interviews over the years, and when she has spoken to historians or journalists, she has emphasized her desire for privacy and her belief that she should not be defined by family connections to historical monsters. Eva Barbara died in 1971 at the age of only 26, reportedly from health problems, leaving behind a young daughter. This great niece of Eva Braun would represent the next generation, and as far as public records show, members of this line have continued to live private lives with no connection to the Nazi past beyond unavoidable family history. The other members of Eva Braun's immediate family also survived the war and faced the challenge of living with their connection to Hitler. Eva's parents, Friedrich and Franziska Braun, were ordinary people who found themselves in an extraordinary and eventually nightmarish situation. They had not been Nazis or particularly political people. Their daughter's relationship with Hitler brought them no real benefits and considerable complications. After the war, they faced suspicion and interrogation from Allied authorities, but were not charged with any crimes. They lived quietly in Bavaria until their deaths in the 1960s and 1970s. They rarely spoke publicly about Eva or Hitler and tried to live as normally as possible despite their unwanted place in history. The question of why Eva Braun never had children is worth exploring more deeply, as it touches on both historical circumstances and personal choices. From Eva's perspective, there's evidence she would have liked to marry Hitler and possibly have children with him. Her letters and diary entries, written before she knew they would become historical documents, express frustration with Hitler's refusal to marry her or acknowledge their relationship publicly. She made at least 2 suicide attempts during the 1930s that appear to have been motivated by despair over Hitler's treatment of her and his refusal to commit to their relationship more fully. These actions suggest someone who wanted more from the relationship than she was receiving. However, Hitler was adamant about maintaining his unmarried status for political reasons. and by extension, having children would have been incompatible with the image he was cultivating. From Hitler's perspective, remaining childless appears to have been a deliberate choice based on his conception of his historical role and his views about his own life and legacy. Hitler believed he was a unique historical figure whose importance transcended normal human concerns like family and children. He expressed the view that great men in history were often unmarried and childless, dedicated entirely to their historical missions. He cited various historical figures he admired who had no children as validation for his own choices. Additionally, Hitler was acutely aware of his own mortality, suffered from various real and imagined health problems, and appears to have believed he would not live to old age. Having children whom he would not live to see grow up may have seemed pointless or even cruel from his perspective. There is also the uncomfortable question of Hitler's racial ideology and how it might have affected his thinking about children. Hitler was obsessed with ideas of racial purity and eugenics. He promoted policies encouraging racially pure Germans to have large families, while simultaneously pursuing the forced sterilization and murder of those deemed racially or genetically inferior. Given his twisted ideology, Hitler may have had concerns about his own genetic background. There were rumors, which he was aware of and which troubled him, about possible Jewish ancestry in his family tree. While these rumors were almost certainly false, Hitler's paranoia about them was real. Additionally, there were medical issues in Hitler's extended family, including cousins with disabilities. Given his ideology, he may have been reluctant to risk producing children who might not meet his own insane standards of genetic fitness. The timing factor is also relevant to understanding why Eva Braun never had children. She met Hitler when she was very young, just 17, and he was 40. During the early years of their relationship in the late 1920s and early 1930s, Hitler was consumed with politics, seizing power, and consolidating his dictatorship. He had little time for personal life and was not living with Eva regularly. By the time their relationship became more established in the mid-1930s, and Eva was living at Berchtesgaden, Hitler was fully occupied with governing Germany and planning for war. As World War II began and progressed, Hitler was increasingly focused on military matters, spending most of his time at various military headquarters, rather than at his residences where Eva lived. In the final years of the war, Hitler was consumed with Germany's deteriorating military situation and his own declining health. There simply may never have been a period when both Hitler and Eva were in the same place, in the right frame of mind, and with circumstances conducive to starting a family. The medical questions surrounding both Hitler and Eva Braun's ability to have children remain somewhat speculative, but are worth noting. Hitler's health deteriorated significantly during the war years. He suffered from various conditions, was taking numerous medications prescribed by his personal physician, and there are suggestions in historical sources that some of these medications or underlying health conditions might have affected his fertility. He also suffered from stress, poor diet at times, and the general physical toll of directing a losing war. Eva Braun's health was generally good, and there's no indication she had any fertility problems. But the question of whether she and Hitler ever had unprotected sexual relations, frequently enough for pregnancy to occur, remains open. The phenomenon of people claiming to be descendants of Hitler or Eva Braun continues into the present day, and understanding why these claims persist is psychologically and sociologically interesting. Some people making these claims may genuinely believe them based on family stories, misunderstood genealogical information, or coincidences of timing and location. Others may be seeking attention, trying to sell books or media rights to their stories, or suffering from delusions or mental health issues that lead them to construct elaborate false narratives about their origins. The fame and notoriety of Hitler, even as the most reviled figure of the 20th century, creates a perverse incentive where having some connection to him, even a connection based on falsehood, brings attention and a twisted kind of significance. Additionally, there's a small industry of conspiracy theorists, sensationalist writers, and tabloid media that benefit from promoting these stories, regardless of their factual basis. The historical profession has been consistent in debunking claims about Hitler having children. Academic historians who have devoted their careers to studying the Nazi period, Hitler's biography, and related topics have thoroughly investigated these claims whenever they've arisen and have consistently found them to be baseless. The evidentiary standards of academic history require documentation, corroboration, and verification. Claims about Hitler having children fail all these tests. There are no documents, no credible witnesses, no physical evidence, and no logical explanations for how such children could have existed without leaving traces in the historical record. When evaluated according to the same standards we would apply to any historical claim, the assertion that Hitler and Eva Braun had children simply does not meet the threshold for acceptance. It's also important to understand the broader context of Nazi leadership and their families to fully appreciate the Eva Braun situation. Many top Nazi leaders did have children, and the fates of those children after the war varied considerably. We've discussed in previous programs what happened to the children of Goebbels, Himmler, Goering, Speer, and others. These children faced the burden of their parentage and made various choices about how to deal with their family legacies. Eva Braun's situation was different because she was not herself a Nazi leader, was not a party member, held no official position, and had no independent role in the regime beyond being Hitler's companion. She was complicit in the regime through her association and her willingness to remain with Hitler, despite knowing about Nazi crimes. But she was not a decision-maker or perpetrator in the same way others were. The question of what would have happened to any children of Eva Braun thus becomes even more speculative, as they would have been Hitler's children primarily and only secondarily Eva's. The legal and practical implications of someone actually being Hitler's child are worth considering, even in this hypothetical context. Under German and international law, children cannot be held legally responsible for their parents' crimes. A child of Hitler would have committed no crime simply by being born to him. However, such an individual would face extraordinary social, psychological, and practical challenges. They would be the biological child of history's most notorious mass murderer. Every aspect of their life would be scrutinized. Their genetic relationship to Hitler would be a subject of endless fascination and concern. They would face questions about whether evil could be inherited, whether they carried some genetic predisposition toward Hitler's behaviors, and whether they should be allowed to have children themselves. These are all ethically troubling questions that fortunately remain hypothetical because Hitler had no children. But they illustrate why the claims about Hitler's descendants generate such attention. The DNA studies that have been conducted on Hitler's known relatives are fascinating and relevant to our discussion. Hitler's extended family, descendants of his aunts, uncles, and cousins, includes living people today. Some of these relatives have voluntarily provided DNA samples for historical and genetic research. These studies have established Hitler's Y chromosome haplogroup and other genetic markers. This information could theoretically be used to test claims from people asserting they are Hitler's descendants. If someone claimed to be Hitler's son, for example, they should have the same Y chromosome haplogroup if the claim were true. To date, no one making such claims has been confirmed through genetic testing, and several have been definitively disproven. The availability of DNA testing has become an important tool for debunking false claims about descent from historical figures. Another angle to consider is the Soviet investigation of Hitler's death and their treatment of his remains. The Soviet forces who captured the bunker area took Hitler and Eva Braun's bodies, or what remained of them after partial burning. Soviet investigators performed autopsies, took tissue samples, and preserved certain remains, including skull fragments and dental remains. These materials were used to confirm the identities of Hitler and Eva Braun through dental records. The Soviets also interrogated captured German personnel who had been in the bunker to establish what had happened. None of these investigations found any evidence of children, and if such evidence had existed, the Soviets would have had every incentive to publicize it as part of their propaganda efforts. The fact that Soviet intelligence, which had access to all available witnesses and evidence, never claimed Hitler had children, is significant evidence that no such children existed. The psychological dimension of Eva Braun's life and her relationship with Hitler helps us understand the childlessness from another angle. Eva Braun was trapped in a profoundly unhealthy relationship with a man who was emotionally unavailable, obsessed with power, and responsible for unimaginable crimes. Her diaries and letters reveal someone who was often unhappy, felt neglected and unappreciated, and who struggled with depression and suicidal thoughts. She attempted suicide at least twice during the 1930s. This was not a relationship characterized by mutual love, respect, and stability, the conditions that typically lead to people choosing to have children. Even if Eva wanted children, the dysfunction of her relationship with Hitler and his absolute refusal to commit to her in ways that would have made family life possible meant that children were not a realistic option. The final days of Eva Braun's life also illuminate why she never had children. In April 1945, as Soviet forces closed in on Berlin and the Third Reich collapsed, Eva Braun chose to travel to Berlin to be with Hitler in his bunker, rather than fleeing to safety. She knew that doing so meant almost certain death. In the bunker, she married Hitler in a brief civil ceremony on April 29, 1945. Hours later, on April 30th, they both committed suicide, she by taking cyanide. These actions demonstrate that Eva Braun's primary attachment was to Hitler personally, not to any broader concept of family, future, or legacy. If she had had children, it's difficult to imagine she would have chosen to die in the bunker rather than living to care for them. The very fact that she made this choice confirms that she had no children whose welfare would have provided a reason to survive. The question we might ask is whether Eva Braun could have had children with someone other than Hitler. After all, she was in her 20s and early 30s during most of their relationship, the prime childbearing years, and Hitler was often absent for extended periods. Theoretically, she could have had relationships with other men that could have resulted in pregnancy. However, there is no evidence this occurred. Eva Braun appears to have been faithful to Hitler despite his neglect of her. She was also closely watched by security personnel and had limited freedom of movement and association. Her social circle consisted primarily of Hitler's associates and her own family members. An affair resulting in pregnancy would have been extremely difficult to conceal and would have had disastrous consequences for all involved if discovered. There is simply no credible evidence that Eva Braun had relationships with anyone other than Hitler. Let's also address the question of what would have happened if Eva Braun had become pregnant. This hypothetical scenario helps us understand the historical reality. If Eva had become pregnant by Hitler, several things would likely have occurred. First, Hitler would have been faced with a significant problem. A pregnancy would have contradicted his carefully maintained public image and would have required some response. He might have pressured Eva to terminate the pregnancy, though abortion was illegal in Nazi Germany under most circumstances, and would have been ideologically problematic given Nazi pro-natalist policies. Alternatively, he might have arranged for Eva to give birth in secret and for the child to be adopted or placed with another family. This would have required the involvement of multiple confidants and created risks of exposure. Another possibility is that Hitler might have finally agreed to marry Eva if she were pregnant, though this seems unlikely given his strong feelings about remaining unmarried. Finally, it's possible that a pregnancy would have caused a complete break in their relationship. Any of these scenarios would have left traces in the historical record through witnesses, documents, or subsequent revelations. The absence of any such traces is strong evidence that pregnancy never occurred. The broader mythology surrounding Hitler's death and the conspiracy theories about his escape to South America often include elements about children as part of an attempt to make the story more compelling or believable. The narrative that Hitler escaped and had children in Argentina or elsewhere taps into cultural fascinations with secret identities, hidden descendants, and the idea that notorious figures might have unknown offspring living among us. These stories have been the subject of books, television programs, and films, despite being thoroughly debunked by serious historians. The appeal of such stories lies in their dramatic possibilities rather than their factual basis. They persist because people find them entertaining or because they confirm pre-existing conspiracy-minded worldviews, not because they have any grounding in historical evidence. In conclusion, the answer to the question, what happened to Eva Braun's children after World War II, is straightforward. Nothing happened to them because they never existed. Eva Braun died childless in April 1945, having never been pregnant during her relationship with Adolf Hitler. The various rumors, conspiracy theories, and claims about Hitler and Eva Braun having children are false and unsupported by credible evidence. These stories persist because of the general mystery and fascination surrounding Hitler's private life, because conspiracy theories about Hitler's fate have proven durable, and because some individuals have motivations to claim descent from infamous historical figures. However, historians who have thoroughly investigated Hitler's life, who have examined documents, interviewed witnesses, and analyzed the available evidence, are unanimous in concluding that Hitler had no children. Eva Braun's actual family, her sisters, and their children, did survive the war and have dealt with the burden of their connection to Hitler's companion. But they are not Eva's children. The great-niece of Eva Braun and her descendants represent the closest biological connection to Eva Braun that exists today, And these individuals have understandably chosen private lives with no connection to the Nazi past beyond unavoidable family history. The story of Eva Braun and her non-existent children thus becomes a case study in how historical myths develop, why conspiracy theories persist, and why it's important to maintain rigorous standards of evidence when examining even the most notorious figures and events of the past.